Hey, so today we're going to talk about addictions. We're going to talk about all the things that you're addicted to, all the things that society's addicted to, and what we can do about it. Now, this list is pretty comprehensive, but there's going to be many things on this list that resonate with you. There's no chance, there's literally zero chance if you're listening to this video that there's not going to be something on this list that you are really addicted to. We have so many addictions that we don't even know about. We don't even recognize them as addictions. One of the many reasons for that is because of groupthink and because of societal expectations to be addicted to these things. So let's just get straight into it and see what we're talking about here. Okay, so we're going to go through the most common ones first, the ones which you're probably almost certainly addicted to, and then we'll go through some of the other niche cases as well. So the very first one here, and these are in no particular order, but I think this is the most important one, is your phone, your smartphone. So, I mean, calling it a phone is kind of a misnomer anyway these days. It's a portable computer that you carry around with you and probably rarely use it as a phone. I know I do, or I don't use mine as a phone very often at all. I have another video called Smartphone Usage Daily Tier List. Or daily smartphone usage tier list, and it basically goes into great detail about how to overcome your smartphone addiction. But the short version is this: the average screen time is 3 to 4 hours a day in the West, which is, in my opinion, a crazy amount of time per day to dedicate to pretty much nothing productive. And I devised a way to overcome this, which is twofold. Setting your screen to grayscale. So if you go into the accessibility settings, you can find usually a color corrector. And if you set that to grayscale, it's going to make your phone a lot less appealing. So all of those bright colors that you're used to seeing, all of these social media apps use these bright icons on the home screen. So, bright yellow for Snapchat or bright blue for Facebook, pink or red for Instagram, whatever it is, these colors grab your attention. Well, when you set your phone to grayscale, this becomes a lot less appealing. So that's step one. And step two is to actually have a widget on your home screen. And this widget is going to show you your screen time. So every time you unlock your phone, it's going to tell you how many minutes have I used my phone for today, or how many minutes has it been unlocked for. When you see that go over, say, 15 minutes, you know that you've been using your phone for too much of the day. There's actually a tier list for this, which I explain on the video. So my goal is to be in the S or A tier, S tier being no more than 5 minutes, and the A tier being no more than 15 minutes. But even if you can, at the start, even if you can keep your usage down to under an hour, that's going to be a significant reduction in your daily usage. So we're going to keep going through this list, and then we're going to talk about some objections, some common rationalizations, and also how to cure this. So this video isn't just going to be ranting and complaining and criticizing without solutions. We're actually going to have some really useful practical solutions for you at the end here. Okay, so number one was smartphone. If you look around when you're anywhere on public transport or just walking around the street, or even sat in your home with your family, you're going to see that everyone's addicted to their phone. It's one of the most common addictions now. Almost everyone has it. They can't be without their phones. I've noticed one really interesting thing is when people are not on their phone, they always have to have it within an arm's reach. So I was with some friends recently, and I noticed that although they were clearly making an effort not to be on their phones because we were engaged in a group conversation, several of them still had to have their phone next to them. They were like sat on a couch and they had to have the phone right next to them there so that they could grab it, or they could see it if it lit up, if it buzzed or dinged or a message popped up on the screen, they could still see that. And this is so common now. People just take their phone everywhere with them. I know someone in particular, well, it's not someone, it's a whole bunch of people, really, but someone in particular that always catches my eye whenever they go to the bathroom, they have to take their phone with them. And I always ask them, I say, why are you taking your phone to the bathroom? Oh, just in case I need it. I mean, yeah, if that's not an addiction, I don't know what is. You can't be, more than 10 seconds away from your phone at a time. Okay, so the second one on the list is caffeine. So caffeine's a really big one here because, well, for a start, almost everyone's addicted to it. And secondly, it's a bit sneaky because over the years, I quit caffeine about 3 years ago, and my process was 2 coffees a day initially. That's kind of was my baseline, and then I decided I wanted to reduce my caffeine consumption, so I actually went down to 2 cups of tea a day. So English black tea, and that has around a third of the caffeine content of a coffee. So I was having 2 cups a day, so 2/3 of a coffee a day ish. And I thought that wasn't very much. Other people I know that have tried to curb their caffeine addiction have said they've switched to decaf. And I used to be on board with this. I used to think, well, if you're having decaf or you're just having something quite light like tea, you're not really addicted to it because the caffeine content's so low. Well, we're going to talk about the tests later on and how you can test your addiction, but I'm going to tell you now for the caffeine one. If you try going for 2 weeks without any caffeine, zero caffeine, and that means no decaf, because decaf does have caffeine in it, it's just less. If you try and go without decaf, without tea, without chocolate, obviously chocolate has coffee in it, chocolate has caffeine in it as well. Coffee, green tea, try and cut out your caffeine to zero for 2 weeks. If you do that, you're going to feel absolutely awful. And that's what happened to me a few years ago. So I decided I'm actually going to cut these 2 cups of tea a day. And the reason was I wanted to just not have any addictions. And that's the reason for this whole video. I don't want to have any addictions in my life out of principle, because one of my highest values is autonomy and freedom, and addictions highly jeopardize that. You can't have full autonomy and freedom in your life if you're addicted to things, because you're always driven by them, you're always bound by them. So like the smartphone example that we just talked about, where you need to be within arm's reach of your phone, that kind of rules your life. You have to carry this small device around with you at all times, otherwise you're going to feel highly uncomfortable. And the same thing with caffeine. You always have to be on a daily basis, you have to have at least a couple of occasions where you can make a coffee or go to a coffee shop or make your tea or buy some chocolate or whatever it is. And I didn't want to have that binding contract with caffeine. So when I decided to quit, and bearing in mind this was only 2 cups of tea a day, so we're probably talking at the very most 200 milligrams or something like that. And I felt for 2 weeks I had drug withdrawal symptoms. Bearing in mind caffeine is a psychoactive drug, it was full-on drug withdrawal. So I had chronic, awful headaches and migraines, extremely low mood. I felt so lethargic that I basically couldn't do anything. I've always recommended since, if anyone's going to quit caffeine cold turkey like that, they should definitely book that time off work. If they're working, then you don't want to try and work, especially if you have something cognitively demanding. If you're a programmer or a doctor, or you have something where you need to use your brain a lot, you don't want to be trying to do that when you're going through drug withdrawal. And that really is what it's like when you quit caffeine. We'll get into the tests a bit more later on, but if you don't believe me, which when I tell people this kind of thing, they often don't, do it. Try and prove it to yourself, and try going for 2 weeks with zero caffeine, and you'll see how addicted you are to it. So these first two, which we've covered, the phone and the caffeine, almost everyone's addicted to these things. There's not really many exceptions here. It's really, really taken a hold of pretty much everyone in society. So we're going to move on to the third one here, sugar. So sugar is a sneaky one as well, because people often think of sugar as like candy or chocolate or things that explicitly have sugar in them. You know they have refined sugar in them. And by the way, we are talking about refined sugar here. Any carbohydrate converts to glucose to sugar once you ingest it. So we're not saying you're addicted to carbohydrates. We're saying you're addicted to refined sugar. Now, refined sugar is fairly new in human evolutionary terms. It's been around for not very long in terms of the lifespan of humans on Earth. And so this stuff is in everything. When I quit sugar, you start looking at the packaging of foods you buy, and you realize it's in everything. So the first tier of sugar consumption would be the obvious stuff, would be buying a candy bar or buying a cake. Everyone knows that's going to have refined sugar in it. The second tier would be things like breakfast cereals. If next time you're in a supermarket, if you have a look at the cereals, you'll see that almost every single one of them have refined sugar in them. It's going to be the first, second, or third ingredient on the list, remembering they have to order the ingredients by the quantity or the percentage of that ingredient that the food is made out of. So often sugar is the very first one, which means it's mostly refined sugar. But it's going to be in the top 3 at least. I don't have cereals for breakfast because I like to try and have a balanced breakfast that has some protein in it as well. But if you do want to have cereals for breakfast because it's quick and easy, then have a look next time you're buying whatever your favorite cereal is and try and find one. That's a bit of a challenge there. Try and find a cereal that doesn't have refined sugar in it. There are a couple, there's a couple, but I'm not going to mention them here. If you have a look for yourself, you'll see how difficult it is to find them. So that's the second tier. Now the third tier of refined sugar is the really sneaky stuff, the things that until you really make an effort to quit refined sugar, you're not going to realize how prevalent it is in almost all the foods you eat. So here we're talking about things like pasta sauces, we're talking about bread, things that you would consider savory, essentially. So especially processed foods. If you buy things like processed meats or sausages, you'll often see they have sugar in them. So sugar is added to absolutely everything. And it's not because it's a preservative, it's because it's highly addictive. They actually did a study where they had 2 groups of rats, and they got one of them addicted to cocaine and the other one wasn't. And they actually put them in a cage, and on one end of the cage was a cocaine solution, and the other one was a refined sugar water solution. And even the rats that were addicted, that had already been primed to be addicted to cocaine, still chose sugar. So I remember when that study was first published, there was some clickbaity media articles along the lines of study shows sugar is more addictive than cocaine. So some headline grabbing titles like that, but sadly it seems to be the case. So this is very similar to the caffeine, right? If you want to test this, try really looking at every single thing you eat and trying not to have any refined sugar for 2 weeks, and you'll see the same thing. One of the common questions I have here when I talk to people about this stuff is why? Why should I care about this? And if I'm addicted to my phone, I'm addicted to caffeine, I'm addicted to sugar. And by addiction, we mean that you have an impulse to have these things. You cannot go without them for more than a couple of days, at the most. Why should I care? I enjoy these things. Well, there was what we talked about earlier, freedom and autonomy. It jeopardizes those. It means you don't have them. But the other thing, especially with these physiological ones like caffeine and sugar, things that you're actually ingesting into your body, they massively affect your energy levels. So caffeine is energy on a credit card. It will give you more energy when you ingest it, but you'll pay for it later. You'll feel more tired long term. And the exact same thing happens with refined sugar because of the way it affects your blood sugar levels. So when you quit these things, you'll actually notice once you get over the withdrawal, which I'm telling you now is horrible, but once you get over that, your energy levels are going to be consistent. They're going to be steady throughout the day. And you're going to have a baseline which is much higher than it was before. In exchange for that, you're not going to have the peaks that you used to have before. So whereas when you have sugar throughout the day, so let's say you have your breakfast cereal in the morning, or you have a sandwich at lunchtime that has refined sugar in the bread, like a lot of them do, you're actually going to feel, you're going to not feel those peaks, because you do get a really strong peak. So you're not going to get that rush, you're not going to get those super highs. In exchange, you're not going to get the crashes and the lows. For me, that's a great trade-off. I spend anywhere from 6 to 10 hours, depending on the day, writing code and programming. That's kind of my day job, and I feel much, much better having a steady supply of energy to do that, versus what I used to have before, when I was having caffeine and sugar, where I would have maybe 1 or 2 hours in the day that were super productive. That was when I was high, and I'd had my caffeine and I'd had a sugary snack, and I'd have that, maybe an hour or two where you'd be super productive, and then the other 6 hours, the other 8 hours were super low because you would crash from that. Unless, of course, you feed the addiction and have more. Have a second coffee, have a third coffee, have a second sugary snack, and unfortunately that's the cycle that most people are stuck on throughout the day. The other massive, massive benefit of these two addictions in particular, caffeine and sugar, and to a large degree the smartphone addiction, the massive benefit to quitting these is you're going to sleep much, much better. So caffeine has a half-life of 6 to 8 hours. So what that means is if you ingest so people often say, well, I don't have any coffee after 2 p.m. or even after midday. Well, let's say you have your first and last coffee of the day at 9 a.m. 6 to 8 hours later, so let's average that to 7 hours. So at 4 p.m., you're going to have half the amount of caffeine in your bloodstream that you had when you ingested it. So if you have a 300 milligram coffee at 9 a.m., at 4 p.m., it's going to be 150 milligrams is still going to be in your bloodstream. Now, that level of caffeine has a further half-life of 6 to 8 hours. So if we move on 7 hours to 11 p.m., which is probably when you're going to be trying to go to sleep, if not earlier, you still have 75 milligrams, so half of the amount you had at 4 p.m., still going around your bloodstream. Now that's a significant amount, and it's enough to keep you up and disturb your sleep. Even if you do get off to sleep, it's enough to affect the quality of your sleep, especially the REM stage of your sleep, the deep sleep. So when you stop drinking any caffeine at all, when you stop having any sugar at all, you're going to sleep so much better. It's one of the main benefits, is the fact that it improves your sleep so much. And that has a knock-on effect in improving other areas of your life. So your mood, your energy levels, and just generally your overall well-being. So these top 3 ones here are super, super important, and you're almost certainly addicted to all 3 of these. So that's going to be a really big challenge to get rid of those. I would definitely recommend tackling one at a time. It's the same as anything in life. If you take on too many projects at once, the likelihood is you're going to fail in all of them. So focus on 1 or 2 things at a time. With the addictions, I would say 1. If you try and quit caffeine and sugar and your smartphone at the same time, that's going to be probably overwhelmingly difficult. Okay, so let's move on in the list. So we've gone phone, caffeine, sugar. The 4th one in here is porn. Unfortunately, it's been the case recently, and this goes back to the smartphones, certainly since the iPhone was around. It's so easily accessible. There's no barrier to entry. And one of the ways to overcome any addiction is to introduce a barrier to entry. So make something difficult to do. And it's the inverse, by the way, if you want something to become a habit. So let's say you want to play the guitar every day and you want to become a good guitar player. Well, if your barrier to entry is you need to plug in the guitar and you need to fire up your computer because it's routing through your computer or something, and then you need to tune it, and you need to do some other things, it's much less likely that you're going to get around to doing that because that barrier to entry is there. So if you have instead have it quickly plugged in where you can just flip a switch and it's on and it's all tuned and it's, it stays in tune, then you're much more likely to just pick up that guitar. And the other thing is to make sure it's near you. So the barrier to entry could literally be, well, you have to walk to the other side of your house because that's where you keep it. So instead, if you have it next to your sofa where you sit down watching TV at night, then you're much more likely to play it. So we're going to use that to our advantage to tackle addictions. Porn is one of those things that's so easily accessible because, as we discussed earlier, your smartphone is always within an arm's reach, and because there's essentially an infinite amount of content online, this doesn't just apply to porn but to any form of entertainment. There's more content than you could ever think of consuming. So we need to introduce a barrier to entry there. So there's lots of different ways of doing this. One of the really sneaky ones that you can do if you want to kind of try and hack yourself is you can remove biometric unlocking on your phone. So remove that fingerprint unlock and instead have a PIN or a password to unlock your phone screen. But here's the trick. You're going to make it really long. So your PIN might be 20 digits long, or you might have a password that's 25 characters long. If you do this, it's going to be a massive pain in the ass to unlock your phone, and you're not going to want to do it that often because you've introduced that barrier to entry. So if you're laid in bed at night and you're waiting to go to sleep and you can't sleep, and you're one of the many people that are addicted to porn, and you think, well, that's an easy way to entertain myself and to try and get off to sleep, then if you have to enter a super long password or PIN, it can be that barrier to entry that makes the difference. So that's one of the most common ones here. Now, porn has lots of negative effects on the brain. One of them is it's going to affect your real life interpersonal relationships quite dramatically. It doesn't matter how attractive your partner is. If you condition yourself to seeing unrealistic beauty standards, and that's kind of what you get off to, then it's going to be really difficult with your partner. The other thing is the novelty. So we crave novelty as humans, especially sexually. They actually did, again, another study with rats on this, where they had two rats in a cage, and one was male, one was female. So the male would mate with the female, but afterwards he wouldn't mate with her again for a few hours, and even if they tried to force the situation, he wasn't really interested in the same female again. But something really interesting happened when they introduced a new female. That delay of a few hours was reduced, and it was actually reduced to 0. So as soon as you introduce a new female, the male would mate with that female, and again, he wouldn't be interested in mating with her unless you introduced another female. Now, why are we talking about this? Because this is what porn simulates. So if you're scrolling the same way that you do on social media through different videos, or you're watching compilation videos, or you're scrolling through images, your brain can't distinguish between reality and the fact that you're looking at a phone screen. So to your brain, it's exactly what it wants. It's the novelty of having a new person every 10 seconds. It couldn't ask for anything more. And if you condition yourself, if that's the only way that you can enjoy yourself sexually, then it's going to seem really boring when you're with one person, regardless of how much chemistry you have or how attracted you are to them. So porn really does negatively affect your real life interactions. It's going to be a hard one to quit, and you're going to have to go through the test, which we've talked about with sugar and caffeine, but we'll get into later on. So the next one on the list, alcohol. So I had an interesting conversation with someone recently about alcohol. They enjoy alcohol a lot, as most people do, and they describe themselves as a social drinker. So this is one of the common rationalizations, is they'll be around other people that do the same, and it kind of forms this group acceptance. And one of the ways that you can tell when someone is addicted to something is they'll actually get angry at you for not doing that thing. So they will project onto you when you don't partake in whatever it is. So I've noticed this with sugar, for example. It sounds ridiculous, but when I quit refined sugar, I was with someone, with a group of people, and someone started inquiring into why I wasn't having refined sugar, and I explained everything that I've explained to you here in a much shorter fashion. And they kind of got their back up about it. They became defensive, even though I had in no way insinuated that they were addicted to sugar. I was specifically talking about myself. I said that I was addicted to it, and I knew this because I had it every day and couldn't go without having it, without feeling bad. And they became quite defensive about it. And this is a really common thing when people are addicted to something. They want everyone else around them to be doing the same thing. Nowhere is that more prevalent than with alcohol. If you want to prove this to yourself, then next time you're at some kind of group gathering, maybe it's a work event or you're out with a group of friends and everyone's drinking, when someone offers you a drink, say no thanks, especially for the first one of the night. So you haven't had anything to drink yet, and someone says, "Oh, do you want a drink? I'll buy you something," and you say no, and you'll see their face drop, and you'll experience them attempting to pressure you, attempting to peer pressure you into having a drink. So, oh, why not? Go on, have what you know. I'll buy you one, and there's a good chance they'll go and do it anyway. And this isn't because they are extremely altruistic and they want you to maximize your time out and your enjoyment. This is because they want everyone else around them to be doing the same thing as them, because it normalizes it and it makes it acceptable. And with alcohol, the conversation that I was having with someone is they have one alcoholic drink a day. And they said, well, I'm not addicted. I just have one drink of alcohol a day. So either a can of beer or a glass of wine or whatever it is, and they didn't think that qualified as an addiction. So here's the thing: if you have to have something every single day, it's an addiction. And one of the most common rationalizations here that people have is they say, well, I don't have it every day. So, Marlon, I know what you're saying. I would be addicted if I needed it every day, but I don't. Sometimes I'll go 2 days without it, or sometimes I'll go 3 days without it. I don't need it every day. This is one of the most common rationalizations for all of these addictions. And the way that you can prove this to yourself is ask yourself when you last went 2 weeks without it. When did you last go a month without it? So in the case of alcohol, when's the last time that you either went a month without drinking any alcohol at all, not including any times that you've been ill or unwell in some way or in hospital or something like that, but living your normal everyday life, when's the last time that you went for a month without having any? And the second way to test your addiction is to just try that and see how you feel, because you're going to have many cravings. And that's essentially, we'll get into the test shortly, but looking for cravings is one of the big ones. So alcohol. The next one is screens. There's a bit of an overlap here because the most common screen that you're addicted to is your smartphone. But screens in general, people often move from one screen to another, and that's kind of their day. So maybe they start the morning by looking at their smartphone, then they'll go to work and they'll look at a monitor or a laptop screen all day. Obviously interjected with lots of smartphone screen sessions in there as well. And then in the evening, they'll go and sit in front of their TV or tablet or some other screen where they can stream some films or series or something. So we're not going to spend too much time on this one, excuse me, because it's kind of obvious. You probably know this already, especially since we've talked about it so much with smartphones. So screens is the next one. The next one on this list here is criticizing. So just had to clear my throat there. So the next one is criticizing, especially without providing solutions. So I don't think there's anything wrong with criticizing necessarily if you're going to provide a solution. So if you have, if you notice some kind of problem in someone's life or in your own life, ideally, and you're criticizing that, there's nothing wrong with that, because that's the first step to providing a solution and figuring out how you can overcome this thing. And that's what this video is all about. We're talking about all of the addictions we have in our lives, and we're criticizing that and saying there's something wrong with that because it jeopardizes our freedom, it jeopardizes our autonomy, and it gives the power to other people, the people that ultimately are selling all this stuff to us. But we need to have some kind of solution. Otherwise, we're just criticizing for the sake of criticizing. I'm going to provide you solutions here, and I recommend that when you notice yourself criticizing, which you do hundreds of times a day, and if you turn on the TV and you turn on a news channel, you'll see pretty much all it is criticizing. But the problem is it's not solution-driven criticism. So at the end of the criticism, when you turn the news on and someone's criticizing some politician for something they did, or some policy, or something that happened in another country, they'll say how awful it was and how bad it was, and these people are doing the bad thing, they're doing the wrong thing. But very, very, very rarely do they provide any. That kind of made me jump there. This is my doorbell, by the way. All right, so now you've heard the doorbell. Yeah, that startled me. So when people criticize, these kind of things, there's often not a solution to them. So anyway, let's move on. So criticizing was another one. So the next one on the list is being entertained. So being entertained is kind of encapsulated by some of the other things that we talked about here. So obviously we talked about your smartphone, we talked about your screen time. You constantly need to be entertained throughout your life. And you'll notice, if you really start studying this, you probably don't have any time in the day where you're not entertained in some way. Now, when I talk about entertainment, I'm talking about being distracted. So this could include work. So if you're working, and then in between that, you're kind of on your phone, and then when you get home, you're doing something else. It's all distraction, it's all entertainment. There's no time in the day, there's no space in the day where you're just doing nothing. That's one of the great things about meditation practice. Meditation practice will actually give you the time and the space to just be completely relaxed and do nothing, and try and turn your brain off. So the next one that's closely linked to this, speaking of meditation, is thinking. So let me ask you this question. When is the last time that you can remember that you went for, say, 10 minutes without thinking, excluding being asleep? Well, it's probably really hard to remember such a time, because it probably hasn't happened. Meditation is really, really difficult, because if you're really focusing and you're really trying to maximize your time when you're meditating, you're noticing the thoughts as they pop up, and they'll just pop up without you even having any real control or will over them. And then you're kind of noticing them and moving on to the next one. But of course, the aim is, and some people say this isn't the goal of meditation. The goal of meditation is just to be and just to observe. But I'm the type of person that likes results, and I like to see improvements when I do things. So when I meditate, I like to see that each time those gaps where there's no thought, they're getting incrementally bigger. So in one session, I might be able to go 3 seconds without a thought, and then in the next session, it might be 4 seconds. And that really motivates me to keep going. Now, thinking is a massive addiction, because you probably noticed that you haven't gone any period of time without thinking whilst you've been awake throughout the day for your entire life. So meditation is a good practice to try and start overcoming that. So we do have another hard addiction here, vaping. So it used to be cigarettes, and the new thing is vaping now. I remember a few months ago, I was buying something from a store, and I overheard a guy, and he went up to like the cigarette counter where they sell vapes, or like the refills for vapes, and he kind of like the image just resonates in my brain so strongly because it just looked like something out of it reminded me of like a child going and asking for sweets. So he kind of like looked up because the person behind the counter was higher than them, and he looked up at them, and this was a male in his mid-40s, and he kind of said, "Oh, can I have the blueberry vanilla vape or whatever it was?" And it just reminded me of like a child going into a sweet shop and asking for some sweets, and I just found it funny. And then when I saw him afterwards, as soon as he had it, he filled up his vape pen and he was outside the store and he was on it. Uh, I have some friends that are addicted to vaping, and that barrier to entry that we talked about earlier that were there with cigarettes, where you had to go outside and you had to make your cigarette sometimes, and you had to light it, and you had to move away from people, at least if you were considerate. Those barrier to entries are all very conveniently removed with vaping. So you can do it inside, at least in some places, certainly in your own home. People will just do it inside or around you without thinking about it. There's no barrier to entry. So the people that I do know that are addicted to vaping, they are constantly. It's a 24-hour, just smartphone in one hand and vape in the other. And they're just constantly using these vape pens. So that's a pretty obvious one there. So the next one, the next hard addiction here is your car. If you own a car, you're addicted to it. You have to go everywhere with your car. You probably don't consider trying to go places without your car, whether that's cycling or getting public transport. And the reason that you won't do that is because you have a whole bunch of excuses that prevent you from doing it. And this is the same with all of these addictions. We'll start talking about rationalizations when we've gone through this list, but one of the most common rationalizations is excuse making, and essentially saying these are the reasons I can't do it. And what you really mean is you don't want to do it. You don't want to get the train because it's more expensive, because there's a barrier to entry. You have to walk to the train station, and it seems like it's more hassle. But yeah, cars are, people are obsessed with their cars. Some people, you see them out cleaning them and waxing them and polishing them, which to me is just crazy. It's part of, it's tightly coupled with another addiction, which is status. So your car, your house, your job, your clothes, your money, your looks, your appearance, these things all tie into how you believe other people perceive you. And the way that other people perceive you, in your mind at least, dictates your status, your societal, hierarchical status. So people are very addicted to their status, and they'll spend, in many cases, people will spend their entire lives, just trying to elevate their status. So just trying to make more money so they can buy a certain car, a certain house, or just have a certain lifestyle, which gives off the impression of status. One of the ways that people rationalize all addictions is through groupthink and through culture. So, for example, just talking about some of the addictions we've already discussed here, you have coffee shops, you have vape shops, you have Reddit and other online forums where people criticize in groups and they criticize together. You have comment sections on social media. So we talked about porn earlier. Why are there comments on porn videos? Why do you need to leave a comment? Well, because you can see other people are watching it, and you can see how many people have watched it and what they think, and it creates that group environment for you. The same thing with bars. We discussed drinking with friends and going out to bars. Well, if you go to a bar, everyone's drinking, even the people you're not with. Cinemas, you go to watch a screen, again with another 100 or 200 people. So this is the most common way that people will rationalize their addictions, is they will be addicted together in a group, and it becomes much more acceptable that way. Status definitely falls into this category because most people are striving and spending their whole lives trying to achieve status. And so because everyone else is doing it, it makes it something that's fairly easy for you to just accept as normal. And once you normalize something, you don't see it as an addiction. And that's kind of the veil that we're trying to uncover here, is we're trying to make you see that you are addicted to these things. These aren't the natural default human condition. These are things that have very recently been sold to you as the normal life. And the reason for all of these is because they make other people money. So notice that all of these addictions make other people money, not you. So status, screens, porn, sugar, caffeine, alcohol, these are all things that you have to buy. You have to buy status, and you have to buy even porn or social media that you think is free. You have to buy it because, first of all, you have to have a device to watch them or use it on, and secondly, you have to buy it in terms of your time, because you're going to have to, if you want to use YouTube, for example, which is a form of social media, and you don't want to pay for it, but then you're going to have to buy those videos with your time in the form of advertisements. And they are, as you all probably know, very considerable these days. So the next one on the list we have here is work. So especially if you work from home, work can be a big addiction. Being busy all the time. So when's the last time that you went for a whole day without any plans? So when's the last time you had one day where you had nothing to do, no plans at all? People are very addicted to being busy. The news. I know some people, especially older people, that will sit and watch the news each morning and each evening. And of course, the most common way to consume the news now is on your smartphone. I've noticed through other people, they actually have news apps installed on their phone, and they will ping them constantly throughout the day with push notifications. So uninstall those news apps if you don't want to be addicted to it. You're not getting anything of value there. And that's the same as everything on this addiction list, by the way. It doesn't add any net positive value to your life. Social media, so Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, using them as a consumer, scrolling mindlessly through them, and also trying to achieve some form of validation through them by posting things and getting likes or views or whatever it is, which again ties back into status. So social media is a tool that feeds the status addiction. So YouTube definitely is in there. It's a bit different unless you post content and you're posting it just to achieve likes. Social media form of YouTube is just scrolling through those videos and then looking through comments and speaking to people that way. Texting. So texting might be a bit of an old term to use here, but when I say texting, I mean WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Signal, whatever it is you use to text your friends. You'll probably notice that you do this compulsively throughout the day. And again, you need to ask yourself, when was the last time that you went an entire day without texting someone? The problem is with texting is it's what you could call low bandwidth communication. It doesn't really add any value to your relationship, certainly nothing on par with actually seeing someone face to face or even speaking to them on the phone. So texting is a really big one that's up there. I know I used to be, before I stopped using those kind of apps, I used to be someone who would send and receive pointless messages many times throughout the day, like, hi, how are you? Which doesn't really add much to someone's day. You're not even really asking anything personal. You could send that to anyone and it would be applicable. Being right. So this is a huge addiction. I know I've suffered from this in the past. And you can ask yourself this question if you want to test yourself and see if you're addicted to this one. How many of your beliefs or worldviews that you have currently do you think are false? And if your answer to that isn't anything significantly over 0, so unless your answer is 10, 20, or 100, you're massively deluded there, because the smartest people in human history have had their beliefs shattered, and these were beliefs that were founded on scientific theory and testing. So unless you've done that yourself, and even if you have done that, you're probably wrong, but most people haven't really done any real science or research in their life, and you probably hold lots of worldviews and beliefs that are completely wrong. And if you question that, if you think that actually most of your beliefs are right, you have to ask yourself if you're just addicted to being right rather than searching for truth. So that's a big one. It's a much deeper topic that I'm going to do a separate video on later, but being right is definitely on this list. Politics and drama. So politics these days is not really any different to reality TV. It uses the same kind of functions, which is generating drama, especially negative drama, so things that make people angry. Anger is the driving emotion when it comes to engagement online. So if you want people to be engaged with your content, just make them angry, and you'll get lots of hits. So politicians know this. There's a certain American politician who's a genius at this. Will intentionally rile people up and make them angry because it's a really effective way of getting people engaged with you. So politics and drama, if you tackle your news addiction, which we talked about earlier, you're going to kind of get this one at the same time. Okay, so that's the list. There's going to be many more, but that's just a starting list for you. So we went through the phone, caffeine, sugar, porn, alcohol, screens, criticizing, being entertained, vaping, your car, work, being busy, the news, social media, YouTube, texting, being right, thinking, status, and politics and drama. So those that's the addiction list I came up with. I definitely recommend you try and come up with your own, because I'm sure there's much more on there that you might have in your own life that you haven't necessarily thought about up until now. So we're just going to wrap up here by talking about a couple of things. We're going to talk about the most common rationalizations for addictions, and then we're going to talk about how to test yourself and see if you're addicted, and then of course how to overcome. So the most common rationalizations that I've heard is, I like it. I just like the taste. Of course, I'm talking about caffeine here, and to some degree sugar, but when you ask people about this, especially coffee, the most common rationalization is, well, I just like it. I just like the taste. I'm not addicted to it because I can go 2 or 3 days without it. And that's the second most common rationalization. Sometimes I go for a weekend, or sometimes I'll go for a few days without it. The other common rationalization is group culture, which we've already talked about. So actually being around lots of other people doing the same thing. So we talked about bars and coffee shops and that kind of thing. So here's your test. If you want the hard version of the test, and there is no easy version, so you've got a choice between hard and extra hard. The hard version of the test is pick one of these addictions and go for 2 weeks without it. So 2 weeks with zero consumption of this thing, whether it's caffeine, sugar, alcohol, social media, whatever it is, your smartphone, whatever it is, try and go for 2 weeks without it. And in that time, what I want you to do is log every day, just have a pen and paper and just tally up how many cravings you have. So every day when you have a craving for this thing, let's say you're tackling caffeine to start with, whenever you get that impulse to go and have some caffeine, or if it's your smartphone, when you have an impulse to pick up your phone and use it, just note that down on a piece of paper, and then at the end of the 2 weeks there, see how many cravings you had. The extra hard version is exactly the same, but it's going to be a month long. Now, if you can go for a month, you're pretty much on your way to completely eradicating that addiction. The first 2 weeks, I will tell you now, are going to be the hardest. Even for some of these softer addictions, like let's say you want to quit social media or the news, they might be a couple of the easier ones to start with because you don't have the physiological addiction like you do with caffeine or alcohol or sugar. It's still going to be really, really tough, and you're gonna experience some withdrawal symptoms, and they may be significant. So if you can go a month, that's definitely the extra hard version. And then what I want you to do is log how many times a day that you actually felt cravings towards these things. And that's the solution. So the solution is to just keep going past that. If you experience positive effects after your first month, so let's say you're tackling your sugar addiction and you do feel that your energy is more stable throughout the day, and you do feel that you didn't get those crashes after the highs, then keep going with it. Just keep going with it. So for me, the caffeine has been a few years now. The sugar, I quit refined sugar in February, so that's been 9 months for me, and I definitely would not go back to consuming these things. One thing that is really tricky here is, and it's another common argument, common objection, well, everything in moderation. Some of these things can't be moderated. They're not things that you can do in moderation. So one example is caffeine. If you try to have 1 cup of coffee a week, for a start, you're going to fail. You're not going to be able to do that. And secondly, it's not really going to add any positive effect to your life, because that one day you're going to feel a massive, massive rush. I mean, it's going to be euphoric. Some people have described consuming caffeine after they've quit it for several months as like a hallucinogenic type experience. You'll realize how strong the effects are, and it's not actually going to be that pleasant. So these are not really things you can do in moderation. And if you do try, what you'll find is you slip and you slip and you slip, and you'll be back to exactly where you started before. So let's say you quit social media and you manage to go a whole month, and you've logged how many cravings you had, and at the end of the month you say, okay, that definitely had positive effects on my life. I feel less stressed. I compare myself less to other people, and I have more free time, much more free time. So you might say, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use social media for an hour a week at most. Well, it's going to be very hard to monitor, and if you do an hour a week, it's quickly going to reignite that compulsion in your brain. So let's say you say on a Saturday, I can have an hour of social media. Well, on the Monday, when you've been working for a couple of hours and you unlock your phone, you're going to think, well, I'll just have another quick look, and then you'll slide back to where you were before. So I hope this list was helpful for you. Go ahead and actually pick something off of it. Pick one thing. Maybe pick an ordered list here. So maybe pick your top 5 and the order that you want to go through them in order of the one that you think that you're the most addicted to the least. So almost certainly your smartphone is going to be the first one up there. And you don't have to quit your smartphone altogether. I understand they do have practical purposes. They do have functions, like, for example, you might use your phone for navigation. You might use Google Maps to navigate or to speak to friends. So instead, go for a restricted amount of time per day, as per the tier list, which we talked about earlier. So have a screen timer on there, and actually when it hits, say, 5 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever you set it to, you can't use it anymore. So that's almost certainly going to be your first one, but you might choose to do the caffeine first, because you're going to sleep so much better and you're going to have so much more stable energy throughout the day. Just be prepared for how you're going to feel that first 2 weeks, but then you've got the rest of your life to feel stable energy levels. And not to mention, as with all of this stuff, the amount of money you'll save. You can save yourself a ton of money and a ton of time. So good luck, enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll speak to you next time.